Hello, everybody, and welcome to your week-ending edition of Daily Detroit. It's Friday, February 7th, 2020, and I'm Sven Gustafson.
And I'm Jared Stays, trying to stop Sven from spending all of my money on these random Alexa quizzes. How'd you do this, man?
I don't know. I think we just broke your Alexa, didn't we?
Yeah, it's totally borked. On today's show,
Smart says bus ridership is up.
the city is suing what it says are its three largest rental slumlords.
And Fletcher Sharpe joins us to talk all about the big trade involving Andre Drummond.
All of that after we thank our Patreon members.
Thank you, Patreon members.
Now on to the show. The Suburban Mobility Authority for Regional Transportation, better known as the SMART bus system, said ridership continues to increase thanks largely to its limited stop fast bus service. Despite declining public transit ridership nationwide, SMART says overall system-wide ridership is up 20% over the last 2 years. Woodward Avenue increased 96%. Michigan Avenue, which goes all the way to Metro Airport, increased 68%, and Gratiot Avenue increased 40%. Those three routes are served by the Fast Service that launched on January 1st, 2018, offering express service between the suburbs and downtown Detroit 7 days a week. It's interesting how this breaks down, Sven.
Indeed it is, and it reflects the popularity and I think pent-up demand for more transportation options here in the Motor City beyond the exalted car.
Well, go figure, you do something reliable and on time and it works. I'm somebody who has used 2 of 3 of those routes pretty often, and they work and they're on time and they show up. And I'll tell you this, people use them. Even when I've taken them into the farther suburbs, especially up Woodward, like people use those without a doubt. It's one of those things that there is this like whole thing of, well, nobody rides the bus, etc. But
not true.
That's not true. And with these fast routes, it's all about being convenient, on time. I mean, these buses have Wi-Fi, which is really cool. Like, it's somewhat of a normal transit service that a region would have. It's nice. It's nice to see.
It is, but I mean, let's also remember that these are 3 routes serving, in a huge sprawling metropolitan area. So they're, by no means are they comprehensive or sufficient to serve the entire population here. I mean, I live right off of Woodward Avenue in Ferndale. I've been using the combination of the Smart Bus and also DDOT on the regular lately to come down here, do shows, because you live right off Woodward as well. And it's great. It's, I think somebody wrote in Curbed recently that it's, hasn't been this easy to ride the bus in Detroit in years, and it's true. The buses are frequent, they're on time. I mean, between DDOT and Smart, you're going to find buses all the time, and it's great. Now, if you live somewhere off of one of these 3 spokes, Michigan Avenue, Gratiot, or Woodward, it might be a different story. You might not have as easy of a time riding, but I think this points out that transit can work here, that there is demand, and I think they've done a good job with this fast bus service for sure.
Well, and I point out that there is demand in the suburbs because we all know that there's demand in the city, and sure, DDOT definitely has some work to do with their service. I personally have dealt with a few ghost buses lately when they just don't show up, but those are on non-peak routes.
Yeah.
This is really interesting because it's suburban, right? It's where people think that the car will have to rule. And I think there just has to be a mix of things. I don't think that the car will go away or anything, but like there has to be options so that people can get to work and do things so that they can make a living. One of the things that's interesting is a data point that we kind of found that I think we should talk about, though.
Smart in its 2019 annual report said that its total operating revenue for the last fiscal year actually fell 11%. That was due apparently to not requesting funding for the fast bus service from the state's Regional Transit Authority, but it was also despite a 5% increase from fare revenue. Smart's also going to present a plan to its board of directors later this month that it says is going to lay out a guide for future improvements in service. So apparently we've got more improvements in store, which is good news.
Yeah, and looking at the city, DDOT said that its monthly ridership in December was nearly 1.84 million, and that's slightly up, I think 3% year over year.
Yep. The city of Detroit has filed lawsuits against 3 of the most notorious speculators and property owners in the city over the condition of the homes they rent to tenants. The city wants the court to declare their business models as a public nuisance and force the owners to fix and maintain their properties and come into compliance with rental laws. The city's law department filed 3 complaints in Wayne County Circuit Court against what it describes as 3 of its most notorious speculators and slumlords. Those are their words. The defendants are Steve and Stephen Hagerman, the father-son team from West Bloomfield, Michael Kelly of Grosse Pointe Woods, and Salame Jaser of Dearborn. Mayor Mike Duggan and Denise Fair, the city's chief public health officer, also issued a separate declaration of public nuisance, saying the landlords are putting children at risk of lead poisoning. The city alleges that all 3 defendants often abandon their deteriorated properties to foreclosure or demolition and leave taxpayers to foot the bill.
I mean, look, the scale of this problem is pretty large. We're talking about more than 1,000 properties. We're talking about properties that Detroiters often live in and just they're not being taken care of. There have been multiple mainstream media reports about it. And if you live in the city, you know people like this. And if you don't, you don't have your eyes open.
Yeah, plumbing not working, mold on the walls, peeling paint, lead paint, which is where, the city's got a problem with lead poisoning among children. That's a huge problem.
Yeah, and it's something that just should not be tolerated and has been going on for far, far too long in the city. I would note that looking over the suits, the city notes their belief that this isn't capitalism, but they explicitly label it as exploitation, as an invest and neglect business strategy, which I think are really interesting words here to put that in there, to say that we're not saying that people shouldn't make money. What we're saying is that you should have a house that's solid. I'd also put that in this whole thing into context. Recently, the city of Detroit tried to push a rental ordinance to require places get up to code and all that kind of stuff. I mean, that just fell flat. Landlords just did not comply. It was one of those things where the government makes a law, but there was no way they could get people to do it. And, I'm sure there's a multitude of reasons why, but it feels like, okay, Mike Duggan's going to go grab something else out of the toolbox.
Beyond rental properties, which are certainly bad enough, I mean, having people actually live in these properties, this pattern of kind of speculators, buying up distressed properties in the city and then sitting on them, doing nothing to improve them for years, decades sometimes, in the hope that the property values increase and that they can cash out eventually. I mean, that's a well-established pattern of, landowners here in the city of Detroit.
Well, and seeing that up front over the years, it has been really frustrating, whether it's community groups, folks like that. It's like people either want to get a hold of a property next to them or they want to do something in the neighborhood. Then you find out, somebody in China owns it or somebody out in the suburbs who doesn't pick up the phone owns it. And they're just sitting there and it just deteriorates because the city hasn't had the resources to enforce any of these tickets, any of these blight issues. And I'm really glad that, frankly, that they're doing something about it. And I know some people will push back and say, like, well, the city should be glad for whatever investment and blah, blah, blah. But I'll go back to this same old thing. If you wouldn't appreciate it in your neighborhood, don't do it in mine. Whether it's dumping, whether it's this kind of stuff, you would not want that happening next to you. And I am, frankly, dead sick of the double standard that gets put on the city all of the time. I mean, Detroiters just deserve what everybody has. Safe housing, clean streets, not having abandoned places next to them. I mean, these are pretty basic asks that I think people deserve.
Preach. Big news in basketball as the Detroit Pistons trade 2-time All-Star center Andre Drummond to the Cleveland Cavaliers. In return, Detroit will get Brandon Knight. He's a former Piston himself. Plus John Henson and a future second-round pick. Joining us to help grok all this is Fletcher Sharpe, our basketball and soccer correspondent. Fletcher, we've talked about this a little bit before. Drummond was obviously rumored to be on the trading block for a while now, but remind us why they wanted to trade their best and longest tenured player.
He always claimed that he wanted to stay in Detroit and finish his entire career in Detroit. And Andre Drummond, for the most part of his career, he's not lied about stuff. He's been like, I'm gonna make sure my game's better next season. His game's better, but he starts shooting 3-pointers. Like, he'll start doing stuff where you're like, you technically aren't lying, but like you're kind of not giving me the truth that I want. So when he says like he wanted to spend his career in Detroit, I believe him. But the problem is there's a pretty decent chance, or a small chance, that he could have opted out of his contract and then just left. The Pistons would have gotten nothing.
Right. His contract was set to expire at the end of this season.
In today's market, in terms of NBA level centers, he's a max player, which means they pay the max amount of money for a contract, which normally runs itself north of 150, 160 million dollars. If the Pistons are trying to rebuild, they cannot afford to sink that type of money into a player, even a player who, while he's been in the NBA for a while, is still relatively young at 26. If they're trying to rebuild and make their team, take the steps process necessary to do that, it means letting go of some pieces that are still quality right now. The consensus was around a lot of journalists and a lot of agents is that Detroit was just happy to get to the playoffs and just whatever happens, we'll just figure it out when we get there. We were the 8th seed. We're gonna get swept by Milwaukee or Cleveland, whoever was a while ago. We'll just deal with it. It's fine. Whatever. We're in the playoffs, so. And it looks like Tom Gores is finally taking a look and saying, you know what? I actually want to be like Philadelphia. I want to be like these other teams who were bad but rebuilt themselves up, and now they're contenders through all the players that they drafted themselves for the most part. Yeah, it's a look at, I guess, the Pistons really saying we're going to legitimately tank. We're going to do the best we can with the pieces we have. But yeah, we don't need Andre Drummond anymore.
Yeah, well, so what does it mean for the team the rest of the season? I mean, he was having a pretty great season, by the numbers anyway, averaging nearly 18 points and 16 rebounds a game so far this season. I mean, what's the rest of is this the Pistons pretty much throwing in the towel on the 2020 season?
The players won't say it. I'll ask Markieff Morris, and he'll look at me like, "Why would you even say something so asinine?" But yeah, it seems very much the Pistons, who are only like 4, maybe a few spots out of the 8th spot right now in the Eastern Conference, to show you how bad the Eastern Conference is. It's showing like, you know what, we're just trying to do what we can to like maintain, and we're gonna come out and compete, which is what Coach Dwayne Casey always wants them to compete. But like, results don't matter to us anymore. Like, we just want to go out there, let our younger players develop. You'll see a lot more Sekou Doumbouya, which is good. You'll see a lot more Svi Mihalik from Kansas and Lithuania. You'll see a lot more of the younger players who are trying to get a chance. You'll see a lot more Christian Wood probably, which is good. You'll get a chance to see these players actually develop and see if they can earn a spot for next year. It's basically a long audition process for a lot of these other players. Yeah, it's kind of good from that standpoint, because you get to see kind of like how the Golden State Warriors, back when they first got Steph Curry, they were like Steph Curry and a bunch of these other bargain players. And then you saw them add another player. Then they added 2 more players. And then all of a sudden it's like, wow, this is like a championship nucleus right here. It gives the Pistons fans, the ones who want to stay around and look, a chance to potentially see how good this team could be when all the pieces finally fit together. Which I know in sports is a long shot. Sometimes you do that for years and years, and then you end up being the Phoenix Suns, who've been rebuilding since Steve Nash left. But it's a chance you take in sports. Either you're going to go all in the next year or two, or you're going to try to rebuild and hope that you can build it back up in 3 years.
What about the 2 new guys that Detroit gets from Cleveland? Brandon Knight, of course, spent his first 2 seasons in the NBA here in Detroit. And John Henson is a center and power forward who spent most of his career, I think, in Milwaukee. What about those 2 players? They bring anything to the Pistons game?
Expiring contracts. I don't really honestly see those players really suiting up for the Pistons. I think they'll be on the roster. I think maybe they might get a few games in. But honestly, I think they need something to fill out the contract for Drummond in the trade going back and forth. It has to be someone equal. So, they're getting paid maybe not the same amount that he's totally in but enough to combine where they're like, we can make this trade go through where it's not, financially ruining one team or the other.
So all these moves, do you think they will put the Pistons in a better position financially at the end of the season to maybe make some moves for next year and get stronger through, draft or trades or other things?
Not next year, but the year following. I mean, I know there are a lot of free agents who are coming up at the end of this year, but Detroit's not going to have enough money to sign most of those players because now we're still paying Blake Griffin as well, who has a pretty big contract. And rebuilding means you got to go young. So, there aren't any young players right now who really would want to come to Detroit. The youngest star I could think of right now who could, fit into the team's young nucleus is Giannis. And, he's looking everywhere else than, Detroit. He's looking to stay in Milwaukee, but also looking towards a city with bright lights. And while I love Detroit very much, it's not Detroit of the mid-'90s. It's a little bit smaller. I don't really see a reason why a star would want to come here and play unless they're traded or something.
Yeah. All right. Before we let you go, Fletcher, shift gears to soccer. Detroit City FC announced a new sponsor recently that kind of flew under the radar. Tell us about that.
So Detroit City FC has become the first, to my knowledge, save for Las Vegas Lights, the USL championship team in Las Vegas who do anything for attention. Save for them, Detroit City FC has become the first team east of the Mississippi to partner with a marijuana company, Pleasantries, based in Detroit. Pleasantries will be one of the chief sponsors. They will not be on the front of the jersey. That's still Motor City Chevrolet, but they will be on the practice jerseys. And I think, I have to double check. I'm fairly certain there's a 2-year deal to where they will get naming rights to the Detroit City Fieldhouse, where Detroit City now operates their like home businesses, spin classes, indoor soccer, etc. So it's pretty exciting. I do know almost all of Northern Guard was for it. A lot of the more casual fans were kind of split 50-50 because Detroit's also making strides in having more prominent youth teams, having women's team, having other teams. Some people were kind of like, well, it's even if it is legal, it's a kids team as well. But I think those people fail to realize is the kids will be wearing the logo, like a marijuana logo on their jersey. I feel like that's smart planning. It's another Detroit company that's partnering with Detroit City FC, and it's good that while they are rising meteorically still, they are still doing their best to try to remain local with the companies that they bond with. So that's like good to see, at least in my eyes.
Yeah, and to your point about the concern about branding with the youth teams and everything. I mean, they've already got Stroh's as a sponsor, so.
Right. That's a lot of people were saying in contrast, like, well, if you don't have a problem with this, you have a problem with the kid wearing a beer logo on the front of their jersey, because like that's essentially the same thing. Both are legal now, so I don't really see what an issue would be, save for the fact that some people just don't want kids wearing those logos. And the funny thing to me, side, a lot of those people don't even have kids in the program, so I'm still wondering like why do you care? It's not affecting you at all. But I think personally, it's great. I think it's great to partner up with other Detroit companies because it allows you, when you get more spotlight, to shine light on them, companies that you actually can vouch for that are doing good things for the community. And it allows like kind of like a Ouroboros of like spotlight. Now we're all getting the shine that we all deserve. And it keeps propelling Detroit back into the front pages for good things. So I'm happy for that.
All right. Well, very interesting. Fletcher Sharpe covers the Pistons and Detroit City FC, and he talks with us here on Daily Detroit. Thanks, Fletcher, so much.
Thanks for having me.
And that'll do it for today's show from what's turned out to be, Sven, really sunny North End. It is beautiful out here today.
It's a sunshiny, beautiful day, especially with reflecting off all that crystal white snow that we got.
It's actually lifting my mood a little bit, which I'm pretty happy about.
We need some sunshine, for sure.
For sure. Well, I want to make sure to take a second to thank those behind the scenes who make this happen. Cheyenne Noserini has been working great editing the show together, was great making sure that the Kara Swisher interview earlier this week happened. There's just so many things she does behind the scenes. She does not get enough praise, and she deserves it all.
Yay, Cheyenne, thank you.
Also, engineer Randy Walker, who is more than just a nerd, but a pretty nice guy. And he's been leaning in a lot. There have been some improvements happening around here, and they're really, on a large level due to Randy. And of course, Fletcher Sharpe, who's been lending his time and talents, and I think we're going to have more of him around too, because, I enjoy his hot takes.
Absolutely. Thanks, Fletcher. And of course, thanks to you, our listeners, and our members at patreon.com/dailydetroit. Your support really does make a difference.
It really, really does. With that, I'm Jairus Days.
And I'm Sven Gustafson. Take care of each other, and we'll see you around Detroit.